I spent my summers, working on the shrimp plant for my dad and visiting Newfoundland, where all my family's from. And there's just nothing quite like that rustic beauty of a part of the world that's so untouched. And Fundy Gin really harvests, that seaside, that seriously clean Arctic current and beautiful sunset, if you will.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Decoding Cocktails podcast. I'm your host, Chris LeBeau. At the ripe age of 38, I left my former career behind and joined the hospitality industry. Since then, I've been on a rapid journey of learning, meeting all sorts of great people, and this podcast is my chance to bring you along with me, whether I'm interviewing somebody that works in the industry, another enthusiast, or occasionally stepping back to share what I'm working on or my thoughts. I'm so glad you're here, and so with that aside, let's get into today's episode. What's happening, everybody? Welcome back for another episode of Decoding Cocktails, coming to you live, not so live actually, on Tuesday mornings, as always, and happy to be here. I am Chris. Thanks for taking time to listen. My guest today is Kristin Pike. By day, she sells learning technologies, but by night, she imports fringe Canadian spirits and liqueurs, which also sounds very interesting. So while Kristin was on a romantic vacation back home through Nova Scotia, she fell in love with a seaweed gin and couldn't help but find herself thinking about, God, I got to get more people exposed to this, in part because she loved it, but also a desire to want to showcase a little bit about the place that she calls home. And thus began her journey of founding Northern Rose Spirits. And so I was excited to talk with Kristin. She and I had initially chatted on the phone, and we met up at Bar Convent Brooklyn. And so as a side note, it was well managed pretty well. You'll hear a little bit of background ambient noise, but overall blends in pretty well. But I was excited to taste some of her products, to hear her story, because she was clearly passionate about it. But also this industry, there's just so many moving parts. And, while there are very complex supply chains that get a lot of these products into all sorts of places, at times you have passionate individuals who are suddenly like, you know what, I'm going to try to figure out how to become an importer. And so right around the time COVID-19 was getting ready to ramp up, we were all there. She was supposed to fly up and finally sit down with this distiller. And so, of course, this waylaid that trip. And so now she's working to build rapport over the phone and Zoom. And, one of the things that's required when you're importing product into a country is to disclose the the recipe. And so while some of these distillers even initially were like, I don't know if I want this product, more widely available. Once Kristin got them on board with it, now she's like, hey, can I have the recipe? And they're like, wait, what is this? Is this some kind of scam? And so anyways, hat tip to Kristin for building out her portfolio and beginning to have some traction there, which is really exciting. And so, it was just interesting to think about what are all the steps required that a person like Kristin undertakes to get something into a bar or onto a bar shelf, as opposed to just throwing it to some distributor who handles this stuff all the time. As I record this, a handful of Kristin's products that I didn't get the chance to taste are on their way, and so there's going to be more on this to come, and also kind of recapping a little bit of what she shared as well about the Bay of Fundy, which I think is going to be fun. So you're going to hear us talk about her amaretto, and great amaretto, guys. It's so good. So try to get your hands on Kristin. If you're not in the right couple of markets, it could be hard, but great amaretto is just so good. And she also has an aperitivo. And so the aperitivo, I always just like to say, even though Kristin doesn't love, and this is totally fine, the comparison of Campari and Aperol, when we say aperitivo, we're often talking about a Italian bitter liqueur. So, the other thing that I was excited regarding talking to Kristin is that there is this incredible world of unique products out there that if we don't look carefully, we can just miss entirely. And Kristin, for example, she has found a cheesemaker who had this byproduct of a bunch of whey laying around, and they have made an eau de vie, a brandy, out of their whey byproduct. And apparently, I haven't tried this one yet, but you're going to get all sorts of exotic fruit notes and herbaceous honey on the nose. And so I just think it's exciting when we continue to see products pop up on the market, but to see things like this that are just so out of left field just really inspires you to think, I wonder what else could possibly be out there besides things that just feel like an iterative riff on what you've already seen. So anyways, keep up with Kristin and her journey at Northern Rose Spirits. That's where you'll find all the stuff. And enjoy this conversation with Kristin. So here we find ourselves sitting in a courtyard at Industry City in Brooklyn. Tell us, so you are one of these crazy people who's working not one job, but two. A lot of people find. What compelled you in the first place to decide, you know what, I think I'm going to import gin into the market? How did you find yourself on the path that you're on right now?
Wow. Great question. I think it probably starts with, of course, the first product that I brought to market, which was the lovely Fundy gin. It was my partner and I on a trip through Nova Scotia to visit my family in Newfoundland. And that's when we fell in love over multiple Fundy gin martinis. And when I first contacted the distillery, they replied back with, "Thank you, we're flattered, but we don't ship across Canada, but thank you." And I went back and I tasted every gin I could, get my lips on, Canadian, Seaside, all that good stuff, because I had this, idea in my head, right? But this was it was special. And so I flew out to Nova Scotia, where I had gone to college. I found Andrew, one of the head distillers and co-founders of the distillery. I found him at the farmer's market, and I told him, I'm not here to work with you to take on aviation gin. I'm just here to bring something truly special that reflects and represents a really special part of the country, the world that I happen to be from, to a place that people really appreciate this sort of thing. And so he told me, "You're absolutely nuts, lady, but I will make you a pallet." So that's kind of how we got things started.
And I mean, you need a little bit of crazy to do all sorts of things in this world. So, I remember in the early conversations we had, you talked about the terroir and the things that make this feel unique to you. So tell me a little bit about why, you felt. So there is no shortage of things labeled gin on the market today.
Sure.
I know there were things about, the area of Fundy Bay that made this feel very unique to you. So paint a picture for us about Fundy Bay. Tell us why you feel like we need another gin on the market right now.
Great question. So Bay of Fundy, just north of Maine, across the Atlantic, you'll find the province of Nova Scotia. And nestled between the provinces of New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, you'll find the Bay of Fundy, which is home to the highest tide in the world. And so that tide goes in and out 40 to 60 feet every 6 hours. So you're essentially able to walk on the sea floor. And it's where, the still-fired distilleries hand harvest their sea dulse. Their dulse, their type of seaweed. So it's absolutely stunning. It's home to some really magical creatures, like these many species of whales that we support with the Fundy Gin some incredible seafood and really incredible people. And I spent my summers, working on the shrimp plant for my dad and visiting Newfoundland, where all my family's from. And there's just nothing quite like that rustic beauty of a part of the world that's so untouched. And Fundy Gin really harvests, that seaside, that seriously clean Arctic current and beautiful sunset, if you will.
For a lot of people, I don't know what they're, to me, when I think about iconic types of gin, I think about a Beefeater, a Tanqueray, things, these very, very, sharp, dry juniper notes. And I suppose since we're sitting here with a bottle in front of me, I'll have myself a little taste right now. But tell us, when I open this bottle right here, what in the heck am I going to potentially run into right here?
Yeah, I think what you're touching on is what many people have this connotation of gin with pine,
yes.
Right? So you kind of have this, and in fact, I was at a tasting on Saturday, upstate New York, and a gentleman said to me, "Oh, I can't have gin. I've drank too much of this, in my earlier years." And I always encourage people to at least smell. And one of the reasons why people have this idea of gin being this kind of piney, distasteful thing in some cases, yep. Is a lot to do with the juniper, right? So in this case, in the gin of what you're smelling and sipping right now, the juniper itself is very carefully chosen. It's a juniper from Croatia, so it's a little more sweet and a little more floral. Very intentional. The distillers at Stillfired, they wanted to balance the umami of the seaweed with this sweet floral juniper. They tried even, I think it was over 300 local to northeast juniper varieties, but they're all so piney. So that's kind of how they landed on this juniper from Croatia. And so it's really amazing to see someone's reaction when they go from, in the example of this gentleman upstate this weekend, from I don't drink gin to, wait a minute, he's bought not one but 2 bottles.
Right, yes.
So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's, it's one of the remarkable things to me about spirits in general these days is not everything has to be for everybody, but we're carrying these memories or ideas of what things have tasted like, and then we discover a quality or diversity of flavor that makes us kind of rethink these things right here. So I know in general, Fundy Gin was the kind of first product you really kind of hang your hat on, but tell us a little bit about Northern Rose in general, your company, because I joke about all the time in class is like, you walk into a liquor store these days and you're just like, the onslaught of product is insane. Yeah. And so, and again, as we sit here at Bar Convent Brooklyn, there's halls of product over there that can get a person in trouble really quickly. So tell us, it seems like, part of your whole bent is that you don't want to bring to market things that have existed before. So tell us a little bit about what your aim is with Northern Rose.
Yeah, totally. I think, naturally for me being from Canada, I want to represent, a part of the world that I'm from, and a very, bring on products that are very terroir driven and all that good stuff. But, I think more importantly, I want to work with producers that are, quote unquote nonconformist, and what I mean by that is someone who's creating something for themselves, right? And possibly in an unapologetic way. I think, most Americans, or even, people from around different parts of the world, when they think of Canadians, they think of us as being so nice, right? Or saying things like sorry this sort of thing, right? But one thing that may go, somewhat unrecognized is just how tough some of us are.
Sure.
And I think that's something that all of the producers that we get to work with, and myself included, have in common. And, whether that's, as we were just talking about earlier, our friends in Nova Scotia, they were commercial divers that built ships, which, fun fact, is actually one of the most dangerous jobs in the world.
Right.
So whether it's Stillfire building their own stills and, using seaweed as a botanical long before that was ever popular, whether that's, our friends in Quebec, Mario creating the first aperitivo in Quebec, right? Or if not, possibly the first in all of Canada, really. And new producers we have coming. I'll just mention, Madeline is a second-generation cheesemaker. She's making an eau de vie out of their whey, which is, of course, a byproduct of cheese.
Yeah.
And, all of these producers that we have the privilege of working with, they're creating something that's their unique and own expression. It's unapologetic and not afraid to color outside of the lines,
Yeah. Yeah. So, I guess I like the fact that in an era when spirits are just growing so much right now, that it does at times feel like some of the brands can feel like they are product first rather than passion, in terms of like, we're trying to catch on to a trend. And yeah, finding this thing of someone who's making a delicious product that, clearly, hopefully they'd like to make a living off of this, but it's more important for them to have something they are proud to stand by.
That's exactly right.
As opposed to something where I'm like, how do I make sure that this gets labeled in? I think, to what, your camel wearing people, your moonshine makers up there, like moonshine, we were just talking about, is this looked down upon, derogatory, less than word to a lot of people. That's, it's like, at least in America, this is connoting, shitty stuff from the hills of Kentucky or whatever. But it doesn't mean that there can't be wonderful craftsmanship behind that. And having, I think it's fair to say, the courage to own that label.
Totally.
And to begin to, because even earlier today when I was having a conversation about Pisco, while Pisco has not been trampled on as a name, as two producers I talked to say, for a lot of people, it's like they hear Pisco, they think Pisco sour, which who doesn't love a Pisco sour?
Absolutely.
And then their thoughts end right after that. They're not curious enough to explore it. So tell us about a couple of the moonshines actually too as well. Yeah. So and anytime you want to tell us about the producers at all too, because it sounds like they can be some fun bunches of humans too. So.
Oh, they're all incredible in each of their own unique ways, right? So and same with each of Stillfire's moonshine. The Fundy, for example, the Stillfire team starts out with base grain corn, local corn. They're distilling. One to vodka, which of course then to gin, and one to whiskey. And their unaged corn whiskey, then they turn to moonshine. It's actually how they got started. And so they make a whole line of different moonshines, whether it's coffee, apple pie, but everything is so craft and locally collected and made from scratch, if you will, like a good old fashioned apple pie moonshine, grandma's apple pie, let's call it. So the next product that we're going to be importing, it's actually landing July 1st, is their strawberry rhubarb moonshine. So this is unaged corn whiskey, and then they get local fresh-pressed strawberry and rhubarb juice. They add the slightest bit of sugar just to balance this, but when people, I've been tasting people on this, of course, in market, and the reaction has just been unbelievable, because this is something that you smell this product, and it's got this really lovely, fresh strawberry jammy nose, a bit like Bon Maman, strawberry jam. And so you're expecting this sweet, sweet liqueur, right? Which a lot of American-made products, if we're honest, can be pretty sweet.
Sure. Yep.
And our palates here are pretty sweet to be as
Yep.
well. But it all of a sudden it opens up into this just like super salty, dry vermouth style product that people are just blown away. And I think that's because they're not afraid to not put stabilizers in it. They're not afraid to not overbalance this with sugar. They're trying to make something that again, honest, authentic, and they're not afraid if it doesn't, maybe every palate's going to be different based on the fact on how the strawberries and rhubarbs did that season. And so, it's a delve into the natural wine spirits world, if you will, right? Which is a bit of a movement. So, yeah. Got it.
Yeah, it is to me something that warrants examination from people in terms of, obviously here we're bringing in strawberry and rhubarb flavors, but I think, as I was saying earlier, I always just think that there's something to this idea that whiskey, corn whiskeys in various ways are beloved and so much, but it's like, but we don't love them until they have been, aged.
Sure.
We assume that up until that point, it's just got to be crap, and so I think there really is something to kind of re-tilting our lens on this right here.
Totally.
Yeah. So for those of us, and that probably makes almost all of us, like who have not spent any time importing spirits into the world, what does that look like? I mean, Canada is not that far from where we're sitting right now, per se, but like, what does it take in order to actually like bring booze across an international borderline? What does that look like right there?
Well, it's a whole heck of a lot of paperwork. They want your formulas, your labels, your XYZ, and it's complicated. It takes a long time. You're at the mercy of, the TTB, which is tobacco and firearms, despite the fact that, to your point, it's very close and just above the border. It's equally as complicated as our imported products that come from overseas. But in this case, it's a much smaller carbon footprint, if I may.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. But once you kind of have a product that's been on the market in Canada, other than like the paperwork, are there any hiccups you encountered in the process, or what was that kind of like in terms of like, I guess, is it just more like time and persistence and like, enduring like endless amounts of paperwork, or is there ever concern things aren't going to be allowed in, I guess? And I don't know if you can't answer that, or you don't know the answer, no worries. But
I mean, I'll quickly share a story, which is, when we first started bringing in the marmelade from Quebec.
Yep.
I mentioned Mario, the producer. We'd kind of gone back and forth around, they ask for your formula, right? And so, he sort of, we did this during the pandemic, so we didn't get the opportunity to meet face to face.
Sure.
In fact, our initial meeting was going to be in March of 2020.
Oh my! The number of things that I know people like had projects start. Anyways, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Of course, right? With this beautiful trip through Quebec planned, so he hadn't looked me in the eye, like he didn't know me necessarily, right? So he said, "Okay, that's about enough. Like, how much more do you want, for this whole adventure? I think, they're not going to take my formula. Like, who are you, basically, right. My recipes, everything, right? So it took some back and forth, but there's certainly been times when, people have kind of wondered, should we even pull the trigger on this, right?
Sure.
Like, but we're very glad that we did.
Yeah. So one of the other things I would be interested, honestly, to talk about that I have not had a chance to really ever talk about on the podcast at all is amaretto. And I think what's interesting is that I think you can have a number of people that are fans, but a couple of things. One, I think, amaretto, speaking of spirits and liqueurs having their names dirtied, I think amaretto sours are certainly would be on a short list of cocktails that were truly destroyed,
Totally.
or just never realized in the era of the cocktail dark ages. So it would have been too sweet, not sour enough, not proofed high enough, because amaretto. So what do you know what your amaretto clocks in at 28%? So so in general, like if you're just having that a sweet and sour mix, God forbid, and heaven meant even more sweetness if you're pouring Sprite in there. Anyways, I'd love to hear about the amaretto, but also I feel like if people even had a bottle, they might not even know what to do with it.
Yeah.
So to whatever insights you can share, but tell us a little bit about the amaretto, and of course, importantly, like why people should be thinking, if people end up having a bottle of yours or just a good one in general, what should they even be doing with this stuff?
Yeah.
Oh my God, it smells so good.
I know. Well, I'll start there with what to do with it. Drink it, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
This does not suck, guys. Yeah.
No. You pour it over ice and squeeze lemon. I think this is, almost an at-home and an in-bar bartender's secret weapon, right? And this amaretto in particular, it's, I think of miele amaretto as almost a category in itself. Right from the name, miel, French for honey, or miele, Italian for honey. Also the name of Mario the Maker's two children, Milan and Eleanor. They're here in the artwork as well.
Okay.
But right from the name, we're starting with a honey-based amaretto, right? So, there's just so many layers and textures to this spirit. The honey base adds this luscious viscosity to it, as you're experiencing. Of course, there's the main, nutty almond flavor, but there's also layers of toasted sesame, chamomile, ginger. It's just stunning. So, I mean, who doesn't like all of these things?
Yeah, and I will say that compared to, because I've tasted definitely some nicer amarettos, and at least in my mind, what I will say is it finishes with a little more warmth, and how much of that is alcohol versus, to your point, like ginger or things like that, helping to kind of add a little heat to it. So it's nice. It is, the texture is very, immediately just fills up the mouth for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I mean, yeah, so for those of you at home who are like, what do I do with my amaretto? On ice, to Kristin's point, a little bit of lemon for sure.
Totally.
And if you're like, I don't know if I like this, you might want to look at the amaretto. Did you buy some $7 bottle at the store? And sometimes, unfortunately, the trouble lies in the raw ingredient we start with on some of these things.
That's exactly right.
And so this comes from a larger, and the aperitivo we have here in front of us too, they both come from the same producer, right?
They are.
And they have a suite of 8 products or something like that?
That's right. A
Okay.
full line of Italian-inspired products being made in Quebec.
Okay. And what, knowing that you, again, with this whole idea being you're not here trying to add just another product to the market, and I mean, so the amaretto's wonderful, but what spoke to you about these two products where you're like, you know what, I need to try to see if I can get these two in my portfolio that I'm pushing?
I think it's kind of a lot similar to what I was suggesting around the amaretto, right? It's the complexity and the layers, and almost the journey that they take you through on your palate, right? So, the marmalade is. People always ask us, is this aperitivo? Are we comparing to Aperol? Are we comparing to, Campari, et cetera, et cetera? This is just a true expression of an Italian aperitivo, but from Quebec.
Sure.
Right? So the lovely herbaceous backbone of sweet gale and these lovely local Quebec-inspired flavors like sea buckthorn, different things like that. It just lends itself to a lot of beautiful, let's call it pre-dinner drinks, right? Whether it's a spritz, it can even go into a Negroni.
Sure.
There's just so many different things you can do with this beautiful product. The minute you open it, which you will in a moment, you'll
That's
be
right.
aromatically, you're just going to fall in love.
Yeah, and I guess with the proofing at 18, my memory's telling me that Campari, I think, is 24 or 25%, and Aperol, I know, is 11. So, yeah, kind of like slips right in the middle in terms of at least actual proofing. Okay, got it. So, yeah, you're right, because I think it's more, because I think I even put it in there as like a question. And, yeah, like sometimes, like, hey, is this more like Aperol or Campari or whatever? These aren't the right questions. It's just more, I just feel like for the layperson in the store, it's like they're often just so lacking any context for, like,
That's right.
They see this, they even see the term aperitivo, and they go, okay, cool, what's that, right? Like, the number of people that don't make the leap to realize, like, oh, this is going to be at least like a lot of Italian bitters or other lighter aperitifs. So I think sometimes I'm looking for just that, like, what does that half step look like for someone to at least try to get their mind around, as opposed to treating this like a category of one.
That's right. I appreciate that, yeah. And I'm sure Mario, the maker, will appreciate that as well, Chris.
Okay. And you pronounce this a marmalade, or how's it? Sorry. So I have a French last name, but I do not speak a lick of French. So
we pronounce it in many ways, depending on kind of where you are. But a marmalade.
Okay.
Marmalade.
That's right. For those of us from the southern Midwest, we'll say marmalade.
But again, I'm not French Canadian.
Okay.
I'm from Newfoundland, so I my French Canadian accent is a little different.
Yeah, okay. And so do we do like typical like oranges and other things like in this guy right here?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I don't know if there's anything like so as Northern Rose continues to grow and get its products spread, like what are your visions for the company for your future, and is there anything about that you'd care to share at all in terms of where you're hoping this might all go?
Yeah, I think there's obviously naturally product expansion, right? We're going to want to bring in new and exciting and innovative things that come across our radar, right? From Canada and maybe even beyond in other countries, but I think we're going to expand across the U.S. We recently launched these 3 products actually in the state of Arizona, which the idea was bring the ocean to the desert, right? And people are really enjoying all of these, which is what's most important. But for me personally, I do eventually, I would like to make products. It's a very specific one, actually. I'm interested in making a rum, actually.
Okay.
Not because, in contradictory to what I'm saying about terroir-driven spirits from Canada, sugarcane certainly doesn't grow in Canada, but sugarcane grows really well in the Philippines. And I happen to be connected to the Philippines through a nonprofit friend of mine and I started many years ago. It's been unfortunately on pause since the pandemic and the start of this business and other things.
But got a lot on your plate.
Yeah, but this connection to the Philippines and the sugarcane, I would like to kind of spend some time firsthand with some of the school systems in the Philippines, which is how we started this nonprofit. But the children in the schools end up leaving halfway through the day to go work on sugarcane fields, and it took them a few weeks for them to be convinced to let me actually go chop sugarcane myself and see what kind of hard work that was.
Wow.
And I barely last a few hours, and I'd like to think of myself as a hard worker. But these tapiceros work, 6 days a week, and they spend their 7th day waiting for pesos at the refinery. And this whole system is just so corrupt that my dream, and again, this is who knows how far out,
sure,
is to have that sugarcane juice presented to a rum here. Sort of random, importing.
It's not
rum,
random at all.
I don't know.
But you had said earlier that hey, like the Philippines occupied a very special moment in your life.
Yes.
And these things begin to imprint themselves on who we are, and I think it's cool to think about building and maintaining, deepening a connection, with a place that matters to you.
Sure.
And especially in the field that you're already in or whatever, to bring dignified product and labor to a market, and also who doesn't love this industry? It's great. So, that's thank you for sharing. I appreciate it.
Well, Chris, I come by this honestly. I come from a pirate and a princess from Newfoundland, so I'd like to think I relate to both.
Yeah.
And, the bootlegging comes naturally, right?
Yeah.
I don't know.
So for people that want to find the products to either keep up with the journey or, of course, so right now, New York and Arizona. Do we have other states that we're in, or are those your two markets right now primarily?
They're the two right now.
Totally fair. Yeah. So where do people find you on the interwebs to kind of keep up with what you're working on?
Oh, it's all northernrosespirits.com, at Northern Rose Spirits. We've got a whole Instagram presence, I suppose.
Yeah, you do. Yeah.
And I'm just Kristin at Northern Rose Spirits. That's me.
Well, thank you for taking time to chat here, and have a delicious and not too inebriated BCB. So,
thank you, Chris.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening. The show notes for today's episode are available at decodingcocktails.com/podcast. If you'd like to keep up with what we're working on, there are two great ways to do so. One, our short weekly newsletter, Cocktail Confidential, which you can sign up for at decodingcocktails.com/newsletter. Or give us a follow on Instagram at Decoding Cocktails. If you think this podcast is great stuff, we'd love it if you'd subscribe or, of course, share an episode with a friend. The Decoding Cocktails podcast is produced by Chris Bay and myself. Thanks for listening. We'll see you again soon, and happy cocktail.